Today's video is going to be a little different. No gear reviews today. I'm going to talk about something that I think is really important. It's been on my mind for a long time. I really can't hold it in anymore. We're going to talk about whether or not a certain group of people are evil or just plain stupid. That's what's coming up next here on Survival on Purpose. Welcome back to Survival on Purpose. My name is Brian. Thanks for joining me. As I said, today's video is going to be a little different. I'm going to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while. I just can't hold it anymore. And as I said, that is going to be about whether a certain group of people, and basically I'm talking about our elected officials, representatives, are either evil or just plain stupid. So, just thought we'd have a conversation. I've got some notes here to keep myself sort of on track as it's getting dark, and maybe we'll get done before it gets dark. But first, I wanted to give a big thank you to the sponsor for today's video, Yours and My Freedom. So, because we're able to do this because of the freedoms we enjoy in the United States of America. There are some places in the world right now that, believe it or not, some of the things I may say could be considered a crime. So anyway, so let me just start with this quote from the Declaration of Independence from the people that the country that became the United States of America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, we can certainly argue that the men who wrote this were not living up to the standards of what they wrote because they owned other human beings. I get that, but that doesn't make that the ideals they wrote, that doesn't mean they weren't true. They were just imperfect people like most of us. So, that being said, we won our independence, created a constitution to form that government which governs from the consent of the governed. And one of the things they did was they created a Bill of Rights to make sure that the inalienable rights which we are born with were not infringed upon by the government that we had created. And one of the rights was the Second Amendment, one of the amendments to that. And this is what it says: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. People who want to infringe upon those rights try to say, well, that means it's just for the militia or whatever. It's very clear from the writings of the founding fathers, the ones that wrote the actual document, what they meant. They meant you and me, people like you and me. So anyway, that being said, well, there's been a lot of different gun control stuff in this nation over the years. Most of the gun control was originally initiated to stop the freed slaves from getting firearms. That literally, that's the reason for it. As usual, gun control is about control, not about guns. So, very recently, last year, the United States Supreme Court in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin decision made some sweeping statements and sweeping decisions about what is and is not legal. And basically, they struck down a huge portion of the gun control laws in this nation. And then what happens immediately, in New York immediately comes back and starts doing a bunch of other stuff and just basically trying to just ignore them. And so, I'm not going to get into all the details about that. There's a lot of other good channels that talk about that. One of my favorites is Guns and Gadgets. I highly encourage if you don't watch them, if you want to learn about Second Amendment news, to do so. But I'm not going to go into a bunch of crime statistics. I'm not going to go, and it's very obvious for most of us that the areas that have the most strict control over private citizen ownership of guns typically have the highest violent crime rates. I don't think that's a big secret to anybody. And I know that you can make the argument that correlation does not equal causation. But I say, you know what, if I see a bird that quacks a lot and walks around, it's pretty reasonable for me to assume that it's a duck, okay? So bottom line, it is ludicrous. It is ludicrous. Leave statistics out of it. Just use your common sense, if you have any, the noggin that God gave you. It is absolutely ludicrous to make the argument that making guns illegal are going to have anything to do with crime. They're making it a crime to have a gun is going to stop criminals. Criminals, by definition, are people who commit crime. You know that. I know that. A 2-year-old knows that. You have to almost turn your brain off to not know that. But yet, over and over and over, we see these elected officials, elected representatives that are supposed to be our representatives, continually working harder and harder and harder, fighting to further restrict your and my right to defend ourselves and our families from criminals and from a overarching usurping government. And I'm not talking about Republicans versus Democrats, because some of the worst gun control in history have been instituted under Republican governments. It's not about parties, it's about freedom. So having said that, to ask myself, okay, if that's the case, you or I and most people can see that, okay, gun laws don't stop crime, right? They don't, I mean, criminals are going to commit crime. That's what they do. So why do they want to restrict your and my right to have a gun and to protect our families more and more? There's only two options I can think of, two reasons. Either they're stupid and they just really don't think things through, and they really think that, oh, if I do this, even though all the data out there says this is not going to help, it'll help. Or they're plain evil. And if you notice, the root word of gun control is not gun, it is control, and it is about control. And people say, well, why do they want control? Why don't people want to control? So English politician and historian Lord Acton said, this famous quote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority." So my contention is that, and I've not heard this argument from very many people, but it seems very obvious to me that throughout recorded human history, there have always been a group of people, certain people, who crave authority and power over others. And you can see it at every level of any kind of authority. You can see it from the pissed off store clerk who's got the power to tell you no, she's not going to give you a refund or whatever because she's having a bad day or he's having a bad day or whatever, all the way up to, kings and monarchs. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Here's some statistics that I want to give you real quickly. In 1911, Turkey established gun control. Between 1915 and 1917, 1.5 million Armenians were killed. In 1929, the Soviet Union established gun control. From 1929 to 1953, 20 million, one way or another, were killed. We're going to return to that one in a minute. 1938, Germany established gun control. From 1930 to 1945, 13 million Jews, Gypsies, and others were killed. In 1935, China established gun control. From 1948 to 1952, 20 million were killed, one way or another, by the government. Guatemala had strict gun control laws on the books for decades. Between 1960 and 1980, 100,000 Mayan Indians were murdered. Uganda had strict gun control for years as a British colony, so it's really hard for them to have guns. Up to 500,000 people murdered by Idi Amin's regime in 1970. Cambodia, strict gun control laws in place for decades before the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot took power. They immediately set about confiscating whatever arms people did have before they murdered about 1 million people. I started checking those. I wanted to check those facts and make sure they were real before I told them to you. And so I checked, and obviously when you search for that, you get this Snopes, fact checker, and PolitiFact, and these places who are supposed to be checking the facts of things that are on the news, right? Two bastions of truthfulness, obviously, there. And a lot of other news sources, the same thing. And they're all quick to point out that, yeah, okay, that did happen. Those people were murdered, but there's no direct link between the gun control and the genocides. There's that old pesky duck again, because whether they, for example, in the Soviet Union, a lot of those people died from starvation because they were, or from being put in forced labor camps. So yeah, they didn't die because they were shot, because they couldn't defend themselves right now with a gun, but they didn't have the ability to rebel against their government or to protest or to stand up to their government because they were unarmed and helpless. So why do these people who are in both the government and in the legacy media or the whatever, are they so adamant about twisting these facts around? What possible motive could they have for restricting our rights further and further and further? The only one I can think of is to enable themselves to be more easily able to maintain and increase their level of control over you and me. Now, look, if you disagree, please tell me in the comments below. Tell me what other possible motive you think they could have, other than they're just stupid. I'll give you that. There's some of them are just stupid, no doubt about it. I get you. And there's some stupid people in the world. There's some real stupid people in Congress. So why am I making this video? To bottom line, because it's so radically different from anything else that I've made in a while, and it's certainly it's just pretty much me ranting. And I'm making it to hopefully spur you to get involved. Join the NRA. I know they got a lot of problems, but still they're the ones that all the politicians are trying to kill, both Republicans and Democrats in many cases. Join the gun owners. Join Gun Owners of America. They're the ones that are working really, really hard and bringing lawsuits and fighting these laws. Second Amendment Foundation. And join your local and state organizations. I mean, it was the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association that took it to the Supreme Court, and thanks to Clarence Thomas, we got a lot of our rights at least delineated that they were to be protected. Now, you know, Congress still tries to pass laws in violation of that. Then literally they took up another assault weapons ban the very next week. We got the Supreme Court saying this is what the Constitution says, and we got the Congress saying we don't need to follow that pesky Constitution. So anyway, get involved and do your part, because literally yours and my freedom depends on it. Our children's freedom depends on it. Depends on the Second Amendment, because that is that's the teeth that protect all the other amendments and all of our other rights. So anyway, I know this has been very different. I appreciate you sticking with me if you did, and we'll be back with our regularly scheduled videos next time. So I really appreciate it. Remember, survival's not an accident, so be prepared and get involved. I'll see you next time.